Damien, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Absolute
And
pleasure.
yes, and you've got that classic YouTuber setup in the background. For those that are watching on video, they can see that nice light in the background. But I want to go back to before Damien Talks Money and YouTube and understand what you were up to that kind of led to you decide to start talking about money as well.
So what I did work-wise, or what led me
Yeah.
into... Okay, I worked in finance. Since I graduated uni, I did a finance degree, and then I went into financial sales. The job I was doing just before I did this was the non-boring way of saying it that people might understand is I was an account manager for a national accountancy firm, and we specialized in like limited companies, so tax efficiency for people using limited companies. And I would just sell the services of the business to our clients, which were like banks. So I would just meet and greet banks, pitch them on our services, entertain them, just account management essentially.
Yeah. And I guess from there, how do you like talk about finance? Were you having like chats with friends about what they should be doing? Where's comes the prompt to say like I'm gonna start creating? Because I think from my perspective, I started creating kind of fitnessy content on Instagram because I was the one in my friend group that got a six pack for the holiday that was
You
was
still got it
was
now. Get it
yeah, don't
out.
you worry, Damien, I got it.
You said that with confidence then.
Yeah, we'll get some more views. But I, that was that was my gateway into it. And sometimes when you're being asked about things by your peer group, it can open your mind up to, oh, maybe I should speak to more people about this.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly the case, that I was the one amongst my friends that was like, oh, you should start investing. It's not what you think it is. But if I'm honest, I really more saw how the American guys were doing, and I thought the UK market is probably quite lacking in like, I mean, I know he's had a bit of a ride recently, but Andre Jick was probably the one where I thought, hold on, there's someone here that's kind of like bringing an element of entertainment to the content that I thought was quite unique. And I thought, well, the UK market seems quite underserved. So I wanted more UK content and wasn't really finding the stuff that I thought fit the bill for me. So I naively thought, well, I'll try and make it. And here we are.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if I'm thinking about demographic wise, you're by far one of the youngest finance guests I've had on in terms of as a creator. A lot of the guys have been like your Pete Matthews from
Yeah.
Meaningful Money. It's been your Andrew Craig's, the author of How to Own the World. It's been Nick
Yeah.
and Julie, who I mean, he's early 30s, but he's kind of more towards that younger end as well. But most of the other guys are kind of like been there, done it for such a long time, and they're maybe speaking to an older audience as well.
Yeah, I think the younger audience is there, and like people say, it's an older man's game, but maybe people just haven't really struck the chord with the younger audience, and shown them kind of what it's about. And I think GameStop brought a lot of people into the market that were younger, and you can see that from the analytics and the way there's more younger investors now than there ever has been. It's just about scooping them up and moving them away from maybe bad habits that pulled them into the market initially.
Yeah, I was talking to Andy Hart, who again is a finance creator, but he's in his early 40s, and we were talking about GameStop, Reddit, the kind of meme stocks, but also some of the crypto coins that pumped during that period too.
Yeah.
And in this kind of instant gratification culture that we live in with Deliveroo, Netflix, instant access to so many different things, I think there's maybe a little bit of an overlap in terms of young people expecting things very, very quickly because that's how we do things. So when you're coming along with investment content, which is saying, yes, there were potential gains to be made from those particular investments, but that's not the case more generally and across the longer term.
Yeah. So, I mean, my message at the time during that period was like, I do this as a bit of fun. It's good to talk about and have a nice time, but 90% of what I do is indexed. And people at the time were like, this guy's missing the opportunity of a lifetime. It's all going to change, blah, blah, blah. In a way, that wisdom has kind of aged well through that period. And I think that's the thing about an index fund strategy. It ages well in downturns like we're seeing at the moment. It's just that, imagine if I'd have started preaching that message maybe 10 years ago, there would have been an almighty bull run that would have seen people who'd got into growth and stuff do quite well over that period. So I've been fortunate in the fact that when I started doing what I did, GameStop brought people that suit my demographic to the market. And then there's been a downturn that's kind of meant that the wisdom that, or my style of investing has aged well versus, other people's. So I am lucky in that sense. But I think all new investors make mistakes when they first come into the market, and then most of them duck out and never touch it again, which is a crying shame. But some will be like, actually, let's see what the right way to do it is.
I think a lot of people have been hurt in the last few months, particularly because, like you say, it was probably quite easy to get into investing, depending how you timed it, of course, during the C19 stuff. Because, like you say, we were in a pretty much a bull market up until Ukraine, I would say.
Yeah, which was the day after I quit my job. The first time I started was that, and I was like, oh no, here we go. So yeah, I think ease of access through I wouldn't say the gamification that's thrown around, but what I mean is platforms that make it very easy to engage with the market. You know, you like in the UK, you have your trading 212s or the Robin Hoods in America that have made access to buying companies very easy, and then you also just have, when you see people like 17-year-olds making millions, you instantly think, well, if they can do it, I can do it. In the same way, me looking at Andre Jick going, if he can do it, I can do it, in terms of YouTube, not realizing just how hard the process actually is. You know, like I said, there's an element of naivety there that gets you into it.
Going full-time finance YouTube in a downturn, do you notice views and your reach impacted by the fact that maybe finance isn't quite as sexy at the moment for some people?
I've actually had a pretty good time of it, to be honest. I mean, like, you know, when I quit, I was probably averaging 20,000 views a video. I think my last 10 videos have averaged about 100,000 views. So they've done okay. One thing I've noticed is all my competition dropped off. Like, you know, this is a competitive space, and I'm from a sales background. Most people ducked out when it got tough, and I was one of the only people left standing, essentially. I could name the amount of like good quality UK finance creators that consistently post on one hand, maybe stretch it over to two. So what probably starved them out of the market was that the ad rates dropped so significantly. You know, for your audience that don't know, you get paid for advertising by Google, and they'll pay you per 1,000 views. And if a finance channel was getting 15 to 20 pounds per 1,000, that dropped as low as 2. Wow. So it became like, you know, that's 10 times less the money, right? So that's a big hit for any kind of business for the same work. So I think a lot of the smaller channels, that killed them off. I basically from context perspective, I've 10x'd in size. I'm probably earning similar money to what I was back then, you know, so that you can see, like, for a smaller channel, that would then be like, am I willing to put 50 hours a week into this? So it's kind of consolidated the market, which has benefited me.
That's so interesting. And equally, I think your quality has continued to improve during that time. So there's a story of creators dropping off and you being the one that's one of the few that's still standing and creating good quality content, but also you've gotten better and better as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So, you know, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Like, I never will be. And I think there's people in the niche that are smarter than me. But what I will do is I'll try and outproduce you in terms of like humor and production. Like, I think those are my USPs, and those are the things that I'm going to lean into that kind of make me me. So I'm not scared of AI, because I'm like, you know, try and be a stupid northerner like me. You can't do that from an AI perspective. So, you know, I just think you lean into your unfair advantages, as Ali Abdul calls it, and mine are those. So that's what I focus on, and I enjoy. I mean, do I want to spend 15 hours editing every video plus? Like, probably not. And I sometimes make the ones that are like the reaction ones that do quite well, you know, that take me just a day to make. But then I like, you know, editing into a beat and doing all those bits that I like doing. Those are the videos where people really go like, wow. And that's the reaction that I crave as a creator.
I was going to say, you'll have your kind of, it'll be more than that, but like 1,000 true fans is like I think it's Kevin Kelly concept.
Yeah.
And that's what you kind of need in order to scale some sort of business. But you've probably got a slightly higher number than that, of course, that are like really true fans that will always love your stuff. And I had Mark Lewis on the podcast, who's a fitness YouTuber in his 40s, and he was talking about he'll create something that's maybe a little bit different for his subscriber base, and his kind of real hardcore true fans will all be in the comments loving it and giving him praise. And he actually says he won't listen too much to that. What he wants to listen to is the next layer of people who comment that are kind of, they like his stuff or they listen to his stuff occasionally. And he wants to hear what they think of the video, because if they react well to it, that's when YouTube will put it on the algorithm, and it will boost to hundreds of thousands, and it will really boom. Like some of the ones that you've done recently, they must have reached people who have never heard of Damien Talks Money, but now they're like, oh, that guy's pretty cool. I liked how he took that approach. And guess what? You come up on the recommended again when you release another banger.
Yeah, it's a hard one to navigate. I mean, as an example, like I've got a UK focus, and it's my belief that, you know, be the UK guy, like the biggest fish in that pond, whereas everyone's desperate to be international. But what that then ultimately means is they kind of water down their usefulness, because it's all very like surface layer. They talk in dollars and they don't really get into, you know, ISAs and pensions in the UK structures. But my most recent video, or one of them that's done quite well, is like 250,000 views and is doing about 1,000 views an hour, which is significant over a course of a month, where you'll get to with that kind of view trajectory. It's a lot of it's American. So I'm getting hundreds and hundreds of American subscribers. The problem is then when I start making UK content, they don't like it. So they soon leave again. But yeah, you know, what you're saying about like comments, you kind of, your comments are the only form of interaction you get with your audience. But then also you've kind of got to take a step back, because only 4% of your audience actually comment, and most of those are the passionate ones. So that means they either love you or they hate you. So you can get a really kind of like unfair picture of like the middle, because you could, if I get 100,000 views on a video and 0.1% of those people hate me, you know, that's 100 comments all going, you're an idiot. Like, do I take that? Like, my math might have been wrong there. So, but it's a lot of comments with people saying, you know, what's wrong with you, you idiot. Like, so you kind of, comments are really hard to navigate as a creator for that reason, like you say.
If you're on different social media platforms promoting your YouTube and using it as a funnel, you probably get more interaction on there. But I know that finance guys in particular absolutely hate Instagram at the moment because of the amount of kind of scammer or copy accounts, where basically your account just gets cloned constantly, and people are getting asked to spend, I don't know, £500 to flip Bitcoin into 1,000 or whatever the next scam is.
Yeah, and they work as well. I get people all the time going, "Oh, I just sent you that £100. When do I get it back?" And I'm like, "Oh." Yeah, so Instagram is bad. I mean, they're all bad in terms of removing comments and stuff. Like, you know, YouTube is plagued by bots. They're just less convincing. You know, Instagram works because it looks more convincing. But I don't promote my videos anyway. I never have. I've never used other channels or anything. I just think like if it's good, it runs on YouTube.
I can understand that. When did you start to develop your kind of unique style of storytelling? Because I was saying to you before we hit record that your retention rate will probably be quite high for a longer form creator, because of the fact that throughout the video, people are getting answers to things that you've left open loops on throughout the discussion. Like, when did you start to decide that that's the style of video you want to create?
No, thank you for noticing that element of the content, first of all. So anyone who makes any form of media will soon realize that it's all just about story, right? Like everything is about story. I'll give you an example of something like, you know, Hot Ones, the Wing, it's that Wing interview show. It's like the biggest interview show on YouTube, where they just get celebrities to eat hot chicken wings, and it gets hotter and hotter as they go through it. That is a story, because there's a beginning and there's an end, there's a middle, there's a narrative that you want to follow. You want to see them go through the progression, you know. So it just seems blindingly obvious to me that there should be a story element to finance, and that actually the stories around finance can be really interesting, because there's already like an emotive element to money. Like it does. So if you can tie that to relatable aspects and stories, then people are just more engaged. I just think the Greeks figured it out thousands of years ago, and you'd be stupid to battle them on it. Like, all content should have an element of story to it. It should feel transformative. It should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. With the humor element, I'm not the funniest guy in the world, but if you look at science around humor, if you can layer in a joke multiple times, it gets funnier each time.
One of the ones that really grabbed me, and I was thinking, I can see exactly from a creative perspective, I can see exactly how you've done this, but you were talking about people in the UK living longer, the king and the future king having to write lots more letters, and you linked it again into like Tommy and Kevin climbing the mountain. Yeah. Where do you come up with the particular stories? Like, what research is going on in the background to allow you to then go and do that?
I just stare at a wall, hoping something will come to me. No, I drive, that helps. And to be honest, I often find that like it's stuff that's recent. So like I'm pretty good at like delving into like my brain and thinking like, what is something that I can apply here? But it's often stuff that's just recently happened. You know, like I watched The Dawn Wall just a few weeks before, and I knew that like, I could tie that in there. But honestly, it's all about trust. Like, you've got to trust your own ability to pull the story out as you go through it. And I start with like I want to make a video about that average person in the UK and what their finances look like, and I want to tie it together with this story about climbing. I have no idea how that's going to pan out. And then like I start and I'm like, okay, what can I say about this? So I go onto Google. I'm like, how do they describe the story of the Dawn Wall? And I noticed they'd only use Tommy's name. And I'm like, oh, right, well, there's a good angle. And then like out of that it all starts to form. You kind of got to trust yourself and just go into it, and you'll find the inspiration as you come along. It's not like I go into it with a master plan.
I know you were joking about staring at a wall, but you did mention driving. Do you find you get quite creative when you drive?
Yeah, massively. Yeah. There's like something about, I just put the music on loud in a drive. And I don't know if it's because you're engaging in like your subconscious brain through driving that you kind of, your head floats away. I have some of my best ideas when I drive.
I
It
was
just
going to
kind of
ask if you
pieces
had the
together.
music on at all, though, but you do. You have it on loud.
Yeah, I blast it. Yeah.
And yeah,
I edit to, I script to music often as well. Like, you know, if I'm like, I want this bit to be like, like I don't know, I just put a beat on that's like that, and then I go with it, and then I keep that on loop. Like my next video that I'm releasing I've used Oliver Tree's song Cash Machine,
yep.
and like I've just had that on repeat for like a week, and that like has formed the script of the song.
Yeah, I completely understand that, and I'm a big believer in the music that takes mood as well. Like you see some people who are like very like dragging themselves through their days, and you look at their playlist and you're like, no wonder, like it's like basically emo music from the 2000s, or like really emotional love songs about heartbreak, and you're thinking, well, no wonder you feel down. Whereas I suppose if you were thinking about, right, I'm going to go and train this particular type of physical challenge, you would have uplifting, upbeat music. So I can see exactly why you dictate how you want to create an edit with the kind of music that you choose to listen to during that period.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, go watch a movie with that song on and it's like it's missing the words. So, you know, if you're making content on a regular basis, I think you need to lean into the music. And it's like a blessing to me as a creator because it's instant, it's mood in a can that I can like leverage. And I can basically say to you, this is how I want this bit of the video to feel without actually saying that. You know, if I do a delicate piano that's really slow, it's got a sentimental vibe to it. Whereas if I come in with like a driving synth, you're going to feel a certain kind of way. And I think that is like, that's magic to a creator. And then, you know, from a scripting perspective, if I'm listening to the kind of emotion and I'm scripting, the script will be that emotion. It's very hard to write an upbeat thing when you're listening to, you know, depressing music, you know, so use it.
Agreed. I have spoken to a number of guests about unplugging though, and that's why I was curious whether the music was on. So a gentleman called Sahil Bloom, he's absolutely blown up on Twitter, and he's now doing really well on his email list as well. He was talking about the power of just, particularly for the kind of people that listen to a podcast like this, and the kind of person like yourself, Damien, that's spending a lot of time plugged into computer screens input, having like a walk in nature where you've got nothing on at all, you'll actually sometimes find that your mind goes crazy. Like think about like sometimes like if you have a shower and there's no music or anything on, you sometimes are like, oh wow, like I should tackle this problem in a particular way because you've got nothing coming in. Particularly for somebody like me, I'm always listening to something, whether it's editing back a podcast I've done or researching an upcoming guest or even just listening to a podcast that I enjoy. Sometimes when you remove the input, that's when your brain starts to maybe process and deal and bring other things to the fore as well.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, but I'm terrible at it. You know, like I'm a student of YouTube, so like I like study every angle of it. I'll watch like cave and disaster videos. Like people are like, what are you watching at the minute? I'm like, I'm not going to tell you because it'll make me feel like a weirdo. But I'm like, I've got my fingers into every aspect of YouTube, and I think if you want to be a YouTuber, you kind of need to be like that because the content has its own vibe. You know, and I'm obsessed with this, right? So any moment that I'm anywhere, I'm listening, consuming, watching YouTube content for inspiration. And I get the whole, you should unplug, but I don't, I'm terrible at that. But I'm not sitting here saying I've got the answers on how to be a well-balanced and rounded individual. I'm not. Like, I know how to make finance videos on YouTube. That's about it. You know, so.
You're also in the growth phase as well, where there's an element of obsession is probably the most high returning habit or behavior that you could have.
Yeah, definitely. I think with YouTube though, it's kind of like if you're not growing, you're dying, really. But like, you know, I know what you mean. If you get to 1 million odd subs and you've got a fairly engaged audience, you can make 1 or 2 videos a month and probably do quite well. You know, you see people back off, don't you? And I'm definitely at the start of the journey. But I don't know. Like, I just, It's the way I am. I go for a walk and I've got the beach near me, like a really nice beach, and I go on a walk and then all I'm doing is watching a YouTube video walking down the beach. It's like I might as well just stand up and walk in a circle.
It's mad. We are really attached to our devices. I know that
Yeah.
you used to sell off market properties
Yeah.
in Manchester. Are you ever going to tell the story about what happened when you had an investor over, you chapped the door, and you weren't potentially allowed into the property due to some of the activities that were going on in there?
That God, that's well remembered. There was a sex swing going on in the kitchen. There was just some very naughty things happening in that apartment, I think was the vibe.
Yeah. Do you think that would go down well on YouTube if you told that story?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like people
What
want real.
finance lesson could you link it to?
What finance? What finance lesson could you listen to that? Link
We're
to
having a
that.
live brainstorming session here, Damo.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, from whose perspective? From the landlord or from
Whoever.
the person in the room? Because from the person in the room, it's like they hadn't, I don't know. The person whose investment it was, you just talk about diversification, don't you? You'd be like, look, mate, like this apartment's a bit wild, but you've owned 20 of them, so it's okay. From the person inside the room, we'd called them and reminded them like 20, 30 times that we were coming around that day, and he was still shocked. So I'd probably heed the warnings of the market or something like this along those lines. I mean,
Oh,
that's
brilliant.
rough
Well,
concepts, but along those lines.
yeah, brilliant. Well, if you do that, you can send me 5% of the ad revenue for helping you come to the come to the conclusion.
My next video, as a little sneak peek, has got those little, those little aliens that we used to. Did you ever? I don't know. I
Millennium
don't know how.
babies.
They were like aliens in goo in an egg.
Yeah, you
And
could stick them to like the ceiling and stuff.
yeah, 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 yeah. And like people used to say, oh, if you wash them and this at midnight, they would have babies. Did you ever? Did you ever fall for that?
I know,
Yeah.
I know the ones that you mean. Like they were like green, weren't they? I think they were called Millennium Babies. I'm sure that was their name.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you remember better than me. Well, I've got one like in the house, and I'm filming some shots of that to like because that's in the next finance video.
Oh, brilliant! No, I really like the diversification of it, and like I say, finance is. I don't think it's boring at all because there is the
No.
emotive power of money, but to get people to tune in constantly about some of the maybe similar messages that you're bringing to the fore,
Yeah.
it's very important that you're able to like keep making it interesting, particularly for different demographics. And the vast majority of the audience that listen to this are in what I would call, from a finance perspective, the accumulation phase, just based on their age and their profile. And I think there's been a narrative that this recession that we're going through and the period that we're in is different for some particular reason. How do you feel about the current market and the period that we're in?
I mean, I know it feels kind of special to people. I mean, it'll feel special to people because most people have never lived through a downturn, or have never invested through a downturn. You might have been around in 07, 08, but you didn't really know. And then we have like these narratives of like the World Economic Forum and like the Matrix from Andrew Tate, and there's a lot more visibility of people now that have these ideas that the world's going to burn. All I'm going to say is like the world has been through a lot worse than what we're going through right now. And from a finance perspective, it is bad in terms of debt levels and things like this. But when you're looking at like World War II, when you're looking at like mass plagues, you're looking at some of the tensions with Russia in the past. There's comparables always to everything we've been through, and the world has always shaken it off. If you're making the bet that this time is different, what you're basically saying is the world is never going to recover. So you're screwed anyway. So
It's a very pessimistic view, isn't it? Yeah, because
yeah,
I've like, while I have maybe about a third of my investments in crypto, I don't necessarily see crypto replacing the fiat system at this moment in
no,
time. I just like, or at least not for a very long time to come. But if I was banking on that, the collapse after that will be so sore. Even though I've got a percentage of my net worth in crypto, I would still be financially devastated to some extent. And so you almost hope that that doesn't actually happen.
yeah. This, for crypto to replace fiat and for fiat to completely collapse, you're talking about a complete unraveling of the social fabric. Essentially, it would be near to like Mad Max kind of levels of like desperateness. I mean, that's an extreme example, but people will riot over like quite small things compared to the dollar and every global currency just completely collapsing. Imagine every home being worth zero. Imagine everyone's bank accounts being at nothing. You know, a replacement is going to take a long time. You know, the dollar has lost 98% of its value since like the 60s or 70s, and it's still not been replaced as the global currency. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, whenever things are difficult, you have people that will come out and say, this is why, and this is X, and they have a convincing message. And the problem is now extreme opinions get a massive platform, so it almost validates them. In the past, you wouldn't have heard from these people because they wouldn't have been able, the soapbox wouldn't have been big enough for them to stand on. It's like Michael Burry, right? The guy is smart. The guy's made a lot of money, but they say he's predicted 38 of the last 2 crashes, you know, because he's always saying everything's about to crash. And then when it does, he's like, everyone's like, oh, he's a genius. And it's like, well, what about all the other times he said that things were going to crash and they didn't?
Yeah,
you know?
a broken clock is right twice a day, or the kind of more rude phrase: if you throw enough shit at a wall, some of it's going to stick. So
Exactly.
yeah, like you say, it's quite easy to be the kind of harbinger of doom at all times, and that's certainly a role that some people play really, really well. Equally, you see people speak with such conviction. One of the things that I've worked on across like 170 odd episodes of the podcast is not always caveating everything for every situation, because you can become too generalist. So if I ask you a question about what are you expecting within the market, you could caveat that with so many different things. Like, bear in mind, Damien, you're not going to be held to account on this particular opinion that you give, and we're recording at this particular time, and you just get lost among this generalist kind of on the fence. I don't know if we're going to be political, liberal Democrat policy approach. And whereas if you can just be a bit more direct and speak without too many caveats, you actually become a lot more convincing. And that's why the likes of Andrew Tate that you mentioned about the Matrix, that's why he's so convincing to so many people that tune into his stuff, particularly of a younger demographic, because he just speaks with total certainty, no caveats about ifs and whats and different things that could mean that the statement is coming up isn't applicable to you. He just speaks with absolutes, and that's why people are like, right, okay, he really knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, his model for growth is be extreme to the max, because you'll get a lot of attention. That's your funnel then, 1 billion views, and you're selling a product at the bottom. And if you get 1 billion eyeballs a month, 100,000 people are buying. They'll buy you poos in an envelope, like literally. Like, that's the kind of funnel he operates. And you saw as he went on and as he gained more and more mainstream attention, he toned down his message, and he became, you know, by the end, if you took only what he said at the end, you might look at him and be like, he's pretty reasonable what he's saying, you know, in his approach. But the stuff at the start was so extreme, like misogynistic, all these things, right? But he said that to get this massive attention. I mean, Piers Morgan is a similar kind of ilk, right? He always says the opposite, because in a digital world where everyone craves attention, if you come out and say something very outrageous, you're going to get a lot of eyeballs. And once you've got the eyeballs, it's the attention economy. You're making serious cash. That's why with finance YouTube, everyone's always like, the market just crashed every single week. I try not to do that, but that's people click on that rather than, you know, a sensible look at why the market is performing okay in the last 6 months.
It's not as sexy, is it? It's not as attractive. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I can completely see that. One of the things that you did cover was the interest rate rise, or the potential impact off the back of the Bank of England raising it to around 4%. Mm-hmm. What did you find when you looked into that?
Yeah, so, I mean, Warren Buffett, I'm not going to steal this quote, said that interest rates are like gravity on asset prices. I think he was talking specifically about stocks, but if you just look at it from a few perspectives, right? As interest rates go up, a few things happen. First of all, debt becomes more expensive, right? So that means that people can't borrow as easy. Businesses can't borrow to expand, and people can't borrow to spend, which are the two key elements. That means there's less investment and money flowing into businesses, which will affect their share price ultimately, because their share price tracks earnings and their earnings reduce. You've then also got the fact that the way people value businesses, a lot of them use these things called discounted cash flow models. And what they're looking at is, how much do I think the cash flows are worth in the future, and track them back to today. And they discount that against the interest rate. As the interest rate goes up, the future cash flows become worth less. I don't want to get too technical, but it's basically the same as someone going, okay, well, why risk my money in the stock market when I can put it in a bank account at a higher interest rate? It's a similar kind of comparison. So as the interest rate rises, the cash flows today are worth, like, you know, they basically they have to discount them at a lesser rate, and that means they ultimately, the value of the business in their eyes drops in the future. Again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds there with the discounted cash flow models, but yeah.
No, I think it's a helpful illustration. And again, the kind of people that would listen to a podcast with you and I are interested in little bits of the minutiae, and they can go more deep on it in full videos that you've done. But people were completely spooked. And like you say, because debt becomes more expensive, the main piece of debt that a lot of normal working people have are loans, whether that's for a mortgage, whether that's for a car or a purchase, or even just for their business as well. So you did see a lot of people get spooked at what their repayments were going to look like, whether that was for, like you say, a house, a car, whatever it is they were working on. And that, I feel, is one of the sore points of a recession, where you typically do see higher interest rates during these periods.
Yeah, well, this is, if you want to be like real blunt about it, this is what the Bank of England wants. They want people to stop spending. They want them to pay off debt because, there's they're worried about inflation. Now, all they've got to control inflation is interest rates, which is a very blunt tool. It's not, raising interest rates isn't fixing the problem in Russia and Ukraine, but that's the tool they have. And what they're trying to do is to curb spending. And, if you're talking about people reducing people's ability to spend, you're then also thinking, well, from an asset price perspective, they're likely to come down, because what supports those asset values is spending. People spending and buying things from businesses boosts their profits, which in the long run boosts their share price. So it all comes down. But,
Agreed. I had a gentleman called Simon Ree on the podcast who'd worked at all these huge banks, and he now works as a trader. And he was talking about the fact that a recession, people assume that it hurts everyone, but actually inflation hurts everyone more, because everyone gets hurt by the same percentage by inflation. Whereas with a recession, it's actually deeper, harder pain for a smaller number of people, those that lose their job, those that loans become unsustainable, those that default on that debt. And I find it quite strange that there's sometimes a narrative like, oh my God, a recession's coming, when actually, like, inflation, which has been pretty painful for a long period of time now, while there have been negative headlines about that, the negative headlines about the interest rates and recession almost seemed even worse than that. And I'm thinking, well, actually, we almost need a recession to tackle inflation for the longer term, at least to try and get it more under control. And we are in quite a spinny cycle where people are worried that we'll go through a recession, then we'll have inflationary, go through a recession, we'll have inflationary, but they'll be more tightly packed in than they have been in previous years.
Yeah, I mean, the media obsession with recessions always makes me laugh, because it's like, oh, we're entering a recession and we're now in a recession. And like, the whole point about a recession is it's technically, the Americans tried to change the definition or whatever, but it's 2 quarters of negative growth. So by the time we've labeled it, we've already been through it. So it's kind of like, we are now in a recession. Everyone's like, shit. And it's like, well, actually, we've just lived through that for 6 months. Are you okay? Have you been eating? You're like, the world is still turning. The recession element is a natural part of the cycle of like this boom and bust that we go through. The inflation is a lot scarier, because, it's stripping away 10% at the minute of your value on an annual basis. And, it's scary to think that if you're getting the average return of the stock market at 9% and inflation is at 10%, and that persistently held, you're going backwards. Even investing in stocks, there's just nowhere to hide. So yeah, they have to control it. The saddest thing is, though, it's always the poorest people who pay the price. And I think that's what you were alluding to. Like the interest rate rises are going to, it's short-term pain, and it's dragged the middle earners into it this time because it's so aggressive, but it never appears to be the top that are really being hurt by these policies.
No, certainly not. We witnessed a massive transfer of wealth during the C-19 stuff through various different means, and people can put their tinfoil hat on for that if required. But they certainly have enough evidence to build a reasonable conspiracy by that point.
Yeah, well, just to write it all off was a joke, right? Like, to dish out the furlough money, to then be like, oh, there's billions in fraud here, but we're just going to scrap that because we can't be bothered. It just seemed a bit, really, like,
it was wild. It was wild.
Yeah.
You could have a podcast series purely on how that period was handled, and I don't think it will be particularly kindly looked upon how any of that was handled from a finance perspective, from a health perspective, and in any regard. But one other big piece of financial news that you reacted to, and I think this is one of the videos that really went off, because I think it would have stuck in quite a lot of people's throats, was that the news has been floated that Jeremy Hunt is going to limit the tax-free ISA to 100k during the spring budget, which will come on the 15th of March. personally, this definitely sticks in my throat and it boils my blood to some extent. What's your own thoughts, Damo?
Yeah, well, I mean, it should stick in anyone's throat, as you say, because it's like to hit 100k inside of an ISA. 100k sounds like a lot of money. It's not if you compound in over 30 years. You could do that with less than 100 quid a month over a 30-year period. But the thing is, I think, you know, we need to look at this properly and go, this is a think tank. It's not Jeremy Hunt. These think tanks are like, they throw out crackers ideas all the time. And I just picked it up as an interesting news piece. And then I think because it got 250,000 views in a week, every other creator went in on it. And then you start to get this like everyone starts to think, oh God, it's everywhere. What interested me was the fact that it hit the mainstream headlines, that this thing, because like I say, they're quite far left leaning think tank, this Resolution Foundation. And so they throw out these kind of suggestions all the time. I think if I was going to say there was going to be any changes, I think it's more to the total amount that you can pay into an ISA. And that this might have surfaced out of the quagmire of crap ideas from think tanks, because maybe they're trying to tee it up as like, everyone's expecting this and then it becomes this. And it's like, well, that's not so bad. When in reality, shaving $5,000 a year off your ISA allowance is still pretty bad for a lot of people. I would bet a lot of money that it's not going to be capped at 100,000. I would be absolutely shocked if they did that, because
I'd be shocked too.
It doesn't
It's a total
benefit
disincentive.
anyone.
Yeah, agreed.
No.
It's a really strange one, but like you say, the fact that it made it into the mainstream media means that somebody somewhere was trying to soften your approach to it, in the same way that they're like, if they release like if I'm going to put my conspiratorial hat on, if they're talking about like we all need to move towards electric cars, the tax on diesel is going to go to this, it goes into the mainstream media first to get a base reaction to the public and how they respond to it. And if you go mental, they probably backtrack, as you said. It'll go from 20 grand to 15. They'll be like, oh, see, it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. I mean, it's still theft in my book.
Yeah, well, if there was no other story and it went from 20 to 15, people would be like, this is a joke. But with this kind of in the ether, people might be like, well, it could have been so much worse, you know. And it's, I mean, like I say, it's tinfoil hat stuff, but it does make me think, you know, why has this piece been picked up by the mainstream media? I certainly didn't help that though, did I? So I reported on it, and then it gains like loads of traction online. I think they're going to come for ISAs, they're going to come for pensions at some point, because they're a lot more palatable than some other things. And when a lot of people here putting 20 grand a year into an ISA, they think that's so much money. But if it's your main retirement vehicle and like you're committed and you earn 50, 60 grand a year, you can get quite close to this, you know, like for people get there. So there's a lot of normal people. I really don't like how anyone above 50 grand a year is like vilified as like being some rich, greedy person by the media. They're not. Like, they're normal people. You know, they could be supporting a house with a stay-at-home partner and 2 kids, and that's not actually that much money. So,
and they could have worked in their field for 15, 20 years and built expertise and moved up, and they're actually valuable to their company, so they're paid accordingly. Yeah, it's a very strange position. I think the UK, and I can only speak from a Scottish perspective, you do sometimes see like a demonization of people who pursue money for like not just fulfillment, but to support themselves and their family. And it's something that they're aspirationally working towards. So maybe you see it in your comment section sometimes, if you're glorifying the pursuit of financial freedom and financial security, sometimes you're looked down upon for being materialistic or not virtuous.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like from a perspective of people being like, oh, this guy's not one of us anymore. You know, he's probably earning loads of money. And it's like, well, hold on. I was born on a council estate in Birmingham to a single parent family. So like, if I'm not one of you, like, what are you? You know. But then my next video is on these things called money scripts, which are like core values that we adopt as children around money. And there's one of the core scripts is called money avoidance. And these people tend to believe that money is evil, that the pursuit of money is not virtuous, and that, like, you know, it's like they don't think people should have money. And that's just like a core value that people develop as a child, and that leads them to have quite a bad relationship with money in later life. So I think if you look at the Americans, they've got a lot of things wrong with them, but one thing they are better at is making money and talking about money. And I think that all comes from this. It's the American dream is a weird way to package it, but it's that's their belief system, rather than in the UK, it's we shouldn't talk about money, it's rude. And I think that generates so many problems for people. It's one of the reasons I started my channel.
No, I think that's a great reason that the channel can benefit, because you can take people who maybe have had that upbringing and that societal programming, and I definitely think you can shift your mindset from what you can consume online. Like I was saying, music that takes mood. One of my other phrases is "you are what you consume," and that includes the content that goes into your eyes and ears. And it can definitely shape how you approach things. And one of my good friends who's been on the podcast, Richard Dixon, he came from a council estate in Glasgow, and he's now a millionaire at 25, does property investing, does education. And he speaks all the time about the working class mindset towards money. And it's very similar to that money avoidance piece, where if you were to talk about, oh, I want to scale to X amount, sometimes people are like, don't be greedy. Like that's not okay. Whereas you're mentioning about the ISA, if somebody's like, oh, my aspiration is to get to a stage where every year I'm putting 20 grand into my ISA to set myself up financially for my retirement, people do balk at that because they think 20 grand is just this absurd largesse amount of money.
Yeah, like how dare you kind of thing. But what if that person's 50 and they've never saved before that, and then they realize, oh crap, actually I need to save for my retirement, otherwise I'm going to be a complete drain on the state. So I'm going to put 20 grand a year into my ISA. But then the limit's brought down to 10. Like, does that person, do you know what I mean? Like they've enlightened themselves at a later stage, and then they fully go hard at it and they commit to it. I don't know. I think, you know, savings and investing is the one way that we can uplift people. And it's the one way the middle class can keep moving up the ladder. And if we just keep taking from that middle class, sorry, wrong word, middle earners, if we keep taking from that middle earning portion, we just end up with no movement upwards. And that's a horrible thing.
Yeah, I didn't massively rate him, but Ed Miliband had a phrase back in 2010 when I was at university. I was studying politics, and he was speaking about the squeezed middle. And I definitely think if you look at society now, of course, we were talking about the pain that the lowest earners and the kind of most financially disadvantaged go through during a recession. But I think the middle in the UK has been absolutely battered over the last period of time in terms of their ability and their earning power. I looked at some stats, and it looks like basically your earning power and your spending power outside of like your kind of your utilities and your basics is down to like 2013 levels right now. So that's almost like a decade ago, and they won't recover for a period of time. So the people in the middle who have two people working in the household, 2 cars in the driveway, 2 kids at school, they are actually got less money to spend than they ever had for almost 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, when I did that, like the look at, you know, the kind of like you're richer than you think style video, I looked at average households and stuff, and you could see that the average household brings in less than is required to spend in the average household. So you're talking, what is poverty, right? Like what is not having enough money? Because to say to someone that a family on 60 grand a year is rich, and then to be like, well, actually they're needing to borrow every month to meet their basic living costs because they live in London and it's thousands, and it's like, well, don't live in London then. It's not as simple as that for these people, right? So I'm really like protective over the middle earners and like the bashing that they get a lot of the time, and I think it's unjust. And I think as a country we need to kind of build up that middle, like, and let them, because that's the engine, right? They're the guys that are funding the pensions, they're the guys that are funding the benefits, they're the guys and girls that are spending in the shops and doing all of that. It seems that, I imagine in the spring budget we're going to see more of that squeezing on the middle, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. I'm glad you mentioned that video, signs that you're doing financially well, even if it doesn't feel like it. What were some of the other most surprising things that you found when you did your research for that one?
First of all, just how many people agreed with the sentiment of like, you know, I feel like I'm not doing well financially. You know, like the amount of people in the comments that are like, thank you so much, it's not just me. That surprised me, because I think there's a tendency of financial influencers to act like an expert, where they sit there and go like, I have all the answers, you know, and I know that's all BS. They don't. They're just researching ahead of their audience and presenting it. So I thought, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put something out that's a bit more like, this is how I feel, and this is kind of the journey I've been on to figure this out. Let's see what you think. And then, you know, the other things are like a quarter of all households are like they're above their means. You know, that's a quarter, right? 1 in 4 households. So you're not saying that all of those are on benefits and stuff. You're saying those are people that are working full time, and maybe that's reckless spending, but I doubt it. And then just the information around debt, the fact that debt levels have gone from like 9,000 on average to 22,000. There's a lot of detail I left out of that. The majority of the debt rise over 2 years, which has more than doubled, is from consumer goods like washing machines and stuff. So people just simply can't afford to replace washing machines and white goods, so they're getting them on finance, and that was about 30 to 40% of that rise was just white goods.
That's crazy, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
that isn't the holiday to Tenerife all inclusive that
No.
people are maybe saying, oh, that's reckless spending. Because like I definitely know, growing up in a pretty comfortable middle class family, there were years where my dad was like, oh, we're not going to go on this particular holiday this year, we're doing that. And from the outside looking in, you would never have assumed that that was the case, but that was just him being more prudent or
Yeah.
frugal, whatever term you want to use. But that's what people would maybe throw at people who are like, oh, you're living beyond your means. Oh, you went on holiday last year. No, we just weren't able to replace the washing machine
Yeah.
at a cost. The boiler broke. That was another £2.5 grand. The roof in the flat was damaged. Like I had that in the last 2 years, the boiler and the roof of my flat. And that's like almost like 15 grand combined. That would sink a lot of ships if you weren't in a position where you were maybe scaling your financial earnings during that period, which touch wood I was, and I decided I was going to do. But it's a very dangerous situation where people have this blanket diagnosis that there is just reckless spending all times. That's why these people are in debt.
Yeah, and also like, let's say you've got kids and stuff, and like you're coming down to the fact that you want to take your kids on one holiday a year, or you want to put the fridge on a credit card. Like many parents, rightfully so, in my opinion, will make the decision to take their kids on holiday. And I know it doesn't make financial sense, but this is, they want their kids to see the world, feel like they're living a little, like they want to feel like they're a better parent than their parents were. And for me and you, right, like a holiday a year was like that was probably a standard thing. I was in a single parent family, and my mum still took me on a holiday every year because you could back then. But I can see why people make the decisions they do.
You've spoken with me just now about crypto and how you're not particularly bullish on it replacing the fiat currency. Where are you as in terms of a mindset when it comes to investing in crypto?
I'm in the exact same place I've always been, which is I think it's exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity there potentially. And I also think I don't know what the hell is going on. So, my whole investment strategy comes from a base of humility that in the grand scheme of things, I probably don't know what's going on. So it's wise to diversify. So by that logic, why wouldn't you diversify into another asset class when it emerges? If I'm holding property and stocks and commodities through, I've got exposure to mining businesses or whatever through my indexes, why wouldn't I then have an allocation to what is an emerging asset class? And I think it's wrong to say it's not an emerging asset class. If you wanted my bull case for it, I would say that any business or any function in the world is just a combination of energy and labor. And if you put enough of that into something, out the other end, you get value. And there's a lot of energy and a lot of labor going into crypto. So it would surprise me if something didn't come out of it. But I'm very much blue chip, Bitcoin, Ethereum, not much else.
I was going to say, like, of the coins, there's probably a small number that will make it through when it becomes a more developed market, because I completely agree it's still very young, albeit Bitcoin has been around for a much longer period. Most of the other coins are a lot younger, and the use case for some of them is still very much up in the air in terms of how valuable that will actually be in the long term. And like some stocks that we were talking about at the start of the podcast that are kind of meme stocks during that period, there's a lot of meme coins that it's incredibly unclear what their value will be after they pumped, and maybe some of the people who were in it very low just completely empty their bags and use that to buy more established coins like Bitcoin, because that's really the strategy for a lot of my friends are very into the crypto. They'll buy in at the all-time lows for some of these smaller coins. When it gets to the bull market, they'll drop out of that, and then they'll buy something they really believe in, which is either a Bitcoin, an XRP, or an Ethereum, because that's the ones that they feel that they're the most confident in for the foreseeable.
Yeah, I think, just study the financial markets before regulation, and you'll see everything that's going on in the crypto space. Like none of it's new. This rug pulls and pump and dumps. It's the playbook on how to scam people invented in like the 20s and 30s through the stock market, basically. So, your friends are playing a risky game because what happens if they don't recover or whatever. But I just have I'd love to become a millionaire overnight by investing in a dog coin, but I don't, I just know that the survivorship bias that we see these people that have done that, there's millions of other people that have just lost money. So I just steer well clear of anything that's like a token built on another thing that's got a white paper that says it's going to build a metaverse or whatever. I'm just like, no thanks.
With an NFT off the back of it too.
But it's worth 2 billion, even though they've done nothing. You know, like what's going on there?
Crazy,
Like,
really crazy.
you know, I mean, you could argue Bitcoin again, like what's that doing really? But it's scarce, you know, and it's truly scarce, and there's a lot of engineering development into it. So that's why I hold it. But we're talking like 1% allocation to crypto within my portfolio, maybe up to 5%.
What does the rest of your portfolio look like?
It's mainly a global index fund. But you know, like 80 to 90%. And then I have like 10% or like 8% allocation into individual businesses, which is more like me trying to be Warren Buffett and failing. Yeah, so you know, I'd buy businesses that I have conviction in at what I think are good prices. So you know, recently I've been loading up on some of the big tech companies that I think are being dragged into this. I know that advertising revenue is down for Google because I get paid by them. So I know that like in times of recovery, how well they will be looking. You know, they're holding up pretty well. So I'm thinking if I can buy Alphabet at 20% down on that and the advertising space recovers, I'll do well. So yeah, like little things like that.
Ones that you use as well, like again referencing my conversation with Andy Hart, he talks about the great companies of the world, and he was like, I'll buy the microphones that I use, I'll buy the laptop software that I use, I'll buy whatever it is. And we were joking about Fiverr because he and I think a lot of people in the creator space really like Fiverr or Upwork, and I think Fiverr kind of overtook them in the C19 period, where people were maybe doing a lot more creative stuff and Fiverr was just a little bit more usable. And Fiverr stock absolutely tanked, but there's actually quite a good bullish case for Fiverr in the longer term, because as a company it's excellent. So people are picking things that they maybe use day to day as well that they really have belief in.
Yeah, I bought some Fiverr at the lows because, you know, from my perspective, if I was trying to get a bit of design work done in the UK, it would cost me thousands potentially. I could get a guy in India to do it for like 20 quid and it'd be the same quality. To me, that's like a no-brainer. Like the fact that they've created that, you know, outsource design to
so reliable as well.
Such good quality as well. Like, you know, I know the UK is full of great designers, but the guys in India, which a lot of it is, are doing it to as good a level and turning it around in like minutes. You know, it seems so I can see the long-term potential there. But like you say, that's leaning into what you know. I actually think Upwork is probably slightly more professional. You know, if I was looking to hire someone on a long-term basis, I would go to Upwork. But yeah, I can see. But people buy into these things on hype, don't they? And it's a long way up now for Fiverr to get back to the peak it was at. Probably needs to 10 to 10x or something.
If your time horizons are long enough, though, which I imagine they are for somebody like yourself with your mindset, then it's quite a reassuring thing. You're like, okay, that money's there. I don't need it. If Fiverr recovers to the extent it can do, then we'll enjoy that. I'd be interested in terms of what's the most important financial decision you feel that you've made.
So I think as we go through life, we constantly make important financial decisions, and as I get like. I run a business now. I make financial decisions that are like much bigger than the ones that I made 5 years ago, right? You know, in terms of the value on them. I say no to things that like all the time that work out quite well for me. I said no to FTX, and that was a lot of money they were offering me because I was just like, this isn't right. But the most important financial decision that's consistently supported me throughout my life is going to sound really boring, but then I'll justify it, is having a really good emergency fund, because it's essentially allowed me to take risks that have then paid off. I had 3 months saved up, and that allowed me to quit my full-time job. My previous job, I was earning like 6 figures. So, you know, it was a big thing to walk away from to do videos. And then the first day, Russia invade Ukraine and the markets collapse, you know. But now I'm earning more than I was working full time, and that's all because I had that cushion. So the best thing I've ever done is that financially, in terms of what it's allowed me to do.
No, I massively appreciate that, and I think some people don't realize the importance of an emergency fund until you get punched in the face by a boiler breaking, by your car breaking down, by losing your job, whatever it is. You don't really realize the value of having that safety net to back you up, and it probably enabled you to have the confidence to go and chase after, which what a lot of people would be their pipe dream, to create videos on YouTube or whatever like passion they particularly have.
Yeah, it's like FU money, isn't it? You know, like I think emergency fund is the wrong term. It's just your option money kind of thing. Like, you know, I was just like, I want to give this a go, and I've got a 3-month run there, and I know that I'm earning enough from the YouTube channel to extend that out. I know that I can go do this for a year, which has been about a year now. And I know that like after 12 months, if it's not working, I'll go back to work, and I'm not going to be destitute.
Yeah, completely get that. What's the lesson you feel like you took the longest to learn, either from a financial perspective or from a business perspective?
I'm still learning lessons all the time. I mean, like, you know, the one thing that I struggle with is like imposter syndrome and dealing with the gravity of putting a video out that gets viewed by like 100,000 people. Like that is enough. That's something that you never kind of prepare for. I don't know. Like it's very hard to. It's like going out on stage in a way. I don't know. I think it's you only really know it unless you do it. So that's a kind of lesson that I'm trying to deal with at the minute. But I think as we evolve, we all go through stages where we have to constantly learn lessons. And I could sit here and say, I wish I knew how to make videos 10 years ago, but in reality, I wouldn't have had the skill set from a knowledge perspective and a life experience perspective to deliver content that people would resonate with. So, you know, we can all go, well, I wish I'd learned this sooner. I wish I'd done that sooner. But I actually think you learn stuff exactly when you need to learn it.
I really like that, to be fair, because one of my regrets whenever I'm asked is always like, oh, I wish I'd started the podcast earlier. I wish I'd started creating online on Instagram and been more willing to be rejected or ridiculed or whatever else happens at the start when you do these creative endeavors. But like you say, you maybe wouldn't have been in a position to provide the value that you did. You would have made even more mistakes, and it might have been catastrophic mistakes that might not have allowed you to develop, because you might not have been ready as a person to deal with that particular situation. Whereas you actually do know that the reason you're in the place you are is because of the events that have unfolded in the way that they have.
Yeah, every bit of my career has led me to the point where I am today. Like, you know, I worked in debt management services, I worked in insolvency, I worked in investments and property. All of that was selling financial products, which basically meant that I had to communicate complicated financial topics to people that knew nothing about it. And that all of that has led me to the point where I'm at right now. So if I took back 10 years ago and said, I want to start right now, I wouldn't have been the same creator. And I think, you know, we just need to be open to learning the lessons. And obviously, once you learn it, it can be like a light bulb going off. But I don't think we need to beat ourselves up. I think we need to realize that actually it all builds up to culminate in a this is how where you do it now. Like I spent my whole 20s trying to figure out how to invent the next Facebook. And in reality, I stumbled across my little Facebook at 30, you know, 30 odd, like in terms of my age.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Have you always wanted to be entrepreneurial and like create your own stuff then, rather than work for the man?
I just wanted to be rich, if I'll be
Mm.
honest with you. I was kind of like, you know, coming back to the money script thing. It's this, it's called a money focus or a money worshipper, and they're people that tie high values to the acquisition of money because they believe that it will solve their problems. And I realize it doesn't, right? But in my youth, I was very focused on money. Just I thought that was. I come from a background of not much money, so in my eyes, every problem that I had as a child could have been fixed by money. So that manifests into me being an adult that thinks I need to get money. You know, like I think a lot of people relate to that.
Would you agree that quite a lot of problems can be solved by money?
Well, yeah, like there's certainly there's pillars of happiness, right? Like health, wealth, family, like relationships, love, whatever. And to say that money won't solve at least some of the problems in your life is a lie. But once you remove the money thing, there's a whole other set of problems that money can't solve, like your health, right? I mean, to a certain point, it might be able to because the royal family all seem to live pretty long. But like, you know, I think the studies that I look at, because I look at like the behavioral finances, that money can buy happiness, but that's all centered around experience and not stuff. So people who spend their money on experiences are happier than people who don't have money for experiences.
I asked Dr. Daniel Crosby about that, and he was able to answer it from a behavioral finance perspective. And you're exactly right. There's a particular point where all your basic needs and even beyond that are met, and then after that, the incremental increases in like how happy you feel by that more money. It's almost offset by the amount of work that you might need to do to achieve that, and you lose that opportunity. And I was really interested in the experience part, because sometimes I think like, okay, well, if I had an extra 15 grand on my basic salary, that would mean that I would have X number of £100 per month to put into another car. But the car would just be another car to me very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas if I used that additional £15,000 to some invest for my future, because I would be like kind of satisfying my future self and my kind of delayed gratification mindset that I've got from my kind of fitness background. But if I use some of that to book a holiday, like a once in a lifetime trip to this particular place, or I took my mum to a particular experience like the theatre in London or something like that, I will always remember that. Whereas I probably won't remember what car I drove when I was between the ages of 30 and 33. It didn't really matter as much unless it was like a supercar, but that's not going to happen in the realms of financial income that I'm talking about.
Yeah, so is it hedonic adjustment, which is the fact that we get very used to what we have. And Dan Blitzarian, or whatever his name is, he said it really well, where he was just like, if I don't eat Michelin star food, I'm disappointed because that's all I've eaten for years. So it's like now a burger is like meh. So I think with experiences, it's like what I constantly look at as I get older is I realize that like the oldest people, just before they die, all they talk about is their memories. That's it. So that's clearly all that matters. You know, like because they've been through it, haven't they? They've run the race. And if all they're sat there talking about is the good times, that's probably really all that matters. So
do you have a bucket list in that regard? Things you want to work towards?
I just want to earn enough. Yeah, I mean, there I go. Look, I start that with I want to earn enough money. So no, I don't really. I have not really thought about it because all I'm focused on is my business at the minute. But I would just like to help people. I would like to spend more time with my family, and I would like to travel and see the world. Because if I think back to every time I've ever been really happy, and all of the things that I talk about with my mates, it's all about times where we've been seeing the world and doing things, you know.
Yeah, that's that's cool. That was one of the questions I was going to ask. How would you deem the next 10 years a success? What would have to happen? You'd have to be able to spend more time with your family. You would have to be able to see the world. Is there anything else on that list that would need to happen for you to be successful?
So from a business perspective, if we remove the family and seeing the world, because I think everyone wants to do that, I would have to have earned enough money within the next 10 years to not have to work again, so that I can say that quitting my career, which was on a trajectory to me being like a director, probably I would have earned like good money. I would have to say that in this next 10 years, I've earned enough to say like I don't need to work again. And then if people, just for every so often, for someone in the street to come up to me and be like, oh, you're Damien, I started investing because of you, then that's a success. Those are the two aspects, you know, like, because you can get lost in the numbers and the fact that there's like a lot of people watching, but every so often someone comes up to me and goes, oh, I started because of you. That then would be, long-term success. To know that there's like loads of people that have sorted themselves out because I made videos.
It becomes very real when somebody gives you that feedback in person rather than online. And I saw this meme where it was like, the world has programmed us to believe that 50 likes in a photo is not a lot of people. But if 50 people came up and gave you a compliment about your appearance or the holiday you've posted about, you would be overwhelmed. And I completely agree with that. So
That's
if even a handful of people coming over to you in the street and saying, Damien, that was great. Like, I loved that video about this, and I started doing this off the back of it, and it was a good financial decision for them to do that. That must feel overwhelming. Whereas you probably get hundreds of comments where, yes, they register, but they register on like a micro level.
Yeah, and then a negative comment will stick in your head. And yeah, like it's nothing beats like just meeting someone and looking at them and being, because it's just me and my camera here, right? Like I speak to 100,000 people and I talk to no one in a reality of it. Like, you know, I post my video and then I just stand there in my kitchen, not knowing like what the real feedback is and things like this. So it's, yeah, like that real human element is great. And like I get people all the time, because I made a video about how to invest in kids, and it's like, I started investing for my child because of you. And like that to me is like, that's the best feeling in terms of
that hits deep.
Yeah, because I just know that at 18 to 25, that kid's going to get a pot of money that is solely because I made a video on that topic, and that's going to give them a leg up, you know, and that's a great feeling.
That's a legacy, isn't it? Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, Damien. I'm sure the listeners have as well. Where should they head towards to continue the conversation with you and check out more of your stuff?
Well, you just search Damien Talks Money on YouTube or Google, and my face will be there, pulling stupid faces.
Uppy pops. Damien, thank you so much. And thank you to you, the listener, as well. If you've enjoyed this one, please make sure you blast it on your Instagram story and tag me at call.cambro. And I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very